All right, so hello everybody, and welcome to the WorkSmart Recovery, Innovation, and Access Workshop 3. Dr. Brea Heidelberg is returning today to talk about building authentic partnerships. I'm Danielle Stobie, Arts Education Manager with ArtsFairfax. I am a white woman with blonde hair, and I have a black background behind me with an ArtsFairfax logo. I use she, her pronouns and have indicated this on Zoom. At this time, I would ask that you please rename yourself with your name, organization, and pronouns. Also, please double check that your microphone is muted. And if you have any questions, please include them in the chat. This session will be recorded, and we now have all recordings available from previous workshops on our website. We also have live closed captioning available that you can turn on by clicking the up arrow next to closed captioning and selecting show subtitle. I would now like to take a second to introduce our president and CEO, Linda Sullivan, who will say a few words of welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sullivan, President and CEO of ArtsFairfax. And I have sort of medium brown hair, sort of chin length, a sparkly black-green top on, and an office that's being pulled apart behind me. I go by see her. I use those pronouns. So I want to thank everyone for joining. We've got a great group today, and I want to thank Dr. Heidelberg for joining us again today. She's just terrific, so we're all looking forward to this. I want to make sure that everybody knows to check our website and our social media. We're pushing out as much support and COVID relief kinds of information and opportunities for the arts community as we can, as soon as we can. There are things coming along, such as another county grant opportunity for small businesses. You'll be hearing more about that. And a lot has been in the news lately coming along. So, please make sure you're getting our information and checking our website. Also, as we all hopefully are starting to get back towards normal, please make sure that if you have any events, please put them on the calendar, because we have an eager community who is sort of waiting to re-engage. And I thank you all for what you are doing and all the hard times you've been through, but hanging in there. So that I basically wanted to say that. And one last thing, please make sure your organization has filled out the Americans for the Arts' COVID impact survey. That gives us, even if you've done it once, you've got to keep that up. That gives us information that we can share with county government and funders about, what the impact, the economic impact has been on our arts groups in the county. So please keep that information up. Thanks a lot, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time and just go over kind of a quick overview and some of the goals we have for the WorkSmart workshops. So our goal is to build capacity of arts organizations and artists to engage people in arts and culture by increasing knowledge and understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And we hope to do this by providing resources and expertise geared to the unique challenges and opportunities of Fairfax County, provide practical tools to advance DEIA in Fairfax through the arts, learn together and from each other, and in the process build new relationships and model best practices of DEIA. So Brea is going to be presenting for the first hour, and then we will have 30 minutes for questions and discussions. Please feel free to type questions into the chat throughout the presentation. And I'd like to take a second just to introduce our presenter for today. Dr. Brea Heidelberg is an arts management educator, consultant, and researcher focusing on the intersection of the arts and other fields of study. She serves as an associate professor and program director at Drexel University. She also founded ISO Arts Consulting, which focuses on human resources issues in the nonprofit arts, particularly issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of you may remember Brea from the Community Roundtable and our last workshop on community engagement. And we're so thrilled that we have her back today to facilitate today's session. So whenever you're ready, Brea.
Great, thank you. All right, everyone. So I am pretty swift with the mute if you forget it. So some of you may have noticed already as you came in, I was muting for you, but do feel free to unmute yourself and raise your hand and ask questions throughout the session. It would be easiest though if you type them into the chat as Danielle already mentioned. So I'm going to share my screen and we are going to jump right in. Allegedly, let's see what Zoom says on this day. Okay. Think we're good to go. So today we're going to be talking about building authentic partnerships. And I'm going to talk about some of the skills and the foundational stuff that goes prior to building those partnerships, and then talk about some practices that I have found to be particularly successful when I've been working both in my own practice and with clients. So we're going to do a brief introduction with some ground rules just so that we're all on the same page. If you've been to any of the previous sessions, they will be the same ground rules. I like to keep it consistent, but just for those that are joining us for the first time, this time we'll go over those. We'll talk about institutional memory and its role in equity work, because that's a really important part of relationship building that in partnership building that people often forget or skip over. We'll talk about repairing relationships and building new ones, because some of you might want to be building partnerships in spaces where your organization has already tread, in addition to starting brand new partnerships. Giving and receiving feedback is an integral part of this process, so I will briefly talk about that. And then we'll talk about some of the things that might come up as you begin this work. I will do my absolute best to leave ample room for questions and discussion. As we've already mentioned, please throw those in the chat. If it makes sense for me to answer them while in process in the presentation, I totally will, especially if it's something that's relevant to a particular slide. If I think that it's better handled or better tackled at the end of the presentation, I will acknowledge that. That's your way of helping keep me honest, so that if in the chat I miss a question or a comment, if I don't verbally acknowledge it, that means that I missed it. So either re-put it in or shout me a holler at the end of the presentation. Okay. So a couple of agreements. We are creating and maintaining a safe and brave space. So this means that you might not agree with everybody, but we are going out on a limb. We are putting ourselves out there because that's what this work requires. I am encouraging everybody to speak from your own experience using I statements to avoid generalizations or speaking on behalf of someone else. In your breakout groups and in this session here, you might share some stories, but especially in the breakout groups, the stories stay in the breakout groups, the lessons can leave and be reported out during our report out portion. Expect and accept that there are many lived experiences and truths that exist. So something that may be sort of like undeniable to you might look different depending on who you're engaging with or who you're interacting with. It's really important to be mindful of the people that you may not always see. So, people usually use the term blind spot. While it can have ableist connotations, I'm thinking of it in the sense of driving in a car and having that one spot that you do need to get into the practice of physically turning your head and making sure there's no one there before you merge into another lane. Not doing so means that you can be driving right next to somebody for a long period of time and not even really know that they're there or know what their experience is. But it's still important to acknowledge and consider. Otherwise, you risk running into them, and you're still responsible for that crash if it happens, regardless of whether or not you saw that individual. So it's important to be mindful of getting into the physical practice of turning your head and making sure that you're seeing everybody that's in the space with you. Also, remember that you are an unfinished masterpiece. We are all working on stuff. So who you are today is not going to be who you are tomorrow, and keeping that in mind as we engage in this work together. So I've already been introduced, but that's a bigger picture of me. Since I'm sharing my screen and you can't really see my face unless you've chosen that particular view, please don't. Okay. So for our first breakout session, I would love to hear what everybody hopes to get out of the day today. This is also a time for you all to introduce yourselves to one another, because we will pop into the breakout groups 2 more times throughout this session. So when you get in there, I'm going to give you just 4 minutes. I know that's a very short amount of time, but please introduce yourselves to one another and have a brief dialogue about what you hope to get out of this session, again, so you can help keep me honest. So I'm going to set those up now. There we go. All right, so I will give you a warning, a heads up on time. And if the person in the group whose birthday is the closest to today, without going backwards in time, so, Price is Right rules without going over. So whoever's birthday is closest to today is going to be your facilitator for this first portion. The facilitator's role is just to make sure that everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves and to speak. All right, I'm sending you to your rooms. Have fun. I need to move room 2. So if you haven't yet, you'll want to go ahead and join breakout group if you have the capacity to do that, if you're on your computer. I am not 100% sure how it works out on the iPhone, but I believe you have the capacity to do that as well. Mm.
Oh, well.
Did you click a button? Okay, I believe we are all back now. I'm just realizing that not everybody's had currently has the capacity to jump into the breakout rooms. So if you were by yourself randomly for this first one, no worries. I believe that will not happen again, and I apologize. So who would like to share? What did your group talk about regarding what they want to get out of the session today?
I'll share. I'm Lila Gordon. I was in a group with Susan, Kevin, and Cecilia. And some of the goals for the session today were how to become more diverse and how to share that motivation to become more diverse, how to move from one-on-one sort of serendipitous relationship building to more intentional relationship building, and how to connect in order to barter assets, talent for space, or other kinds of sharing possibilities.
Thank you. Who else would like to share?
My group didn't really get to the point of saying much about what we wanted to get out of the session because all we had time for was introducing ourselves, and all of a sudden we were like dumped. We were ready to go back into the session. But I was starting to say within the group that one of the things that I'm interested in is how we can appropriately and connect with people who are not like us, whoever us is. We need to make relationships with people that are more diverse and that sort of thing. But that's a challenging thing when you are who you are.
Gotcha. Thank you. One more group?
I'll share. One of the things that I personally mentioned is I'm very interested in hearing specifically not just building new relationships, but how the steps that we can take to help repair or rebuild trust with individuals and organizations that we've worked with in the past who might have any number of reasons to be hesitant about that based on past harms that may have been done, whether we are cognizant of them or not, and how we can not only build new relationships, but rebuild and recultivate trust with individuals we've worked with before.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's make sure we get to all of that good stuff by jumping back in. So institutional memory is a really important concept. Whether or not you actively remember your previous relationships with particular communities, Evan, like I swear the slide was made just for you. So whether or not you actively remember, it's important to understand your institution's history, because you as representatives of your organization are like the face of that organization, and people expect you to be sort of like a living embodiment of your organization's ideals, as well as the past. So if you do actively remember, owning that memory is also important. I strongly encourage organizations to take stock of their previous relationships with different communities, whether or not those are the ones that they are actively working to create partnerships with, because strategic amnesia will shoot you in the foot every time. So if you have had problematic dealings with a particular organization or individual or community in the past, you need to be mindful of that. You need to take full ownership of that. If you have ignored a community in the past, if your building sits in a community and you're not fully aware of who sort of like the community leaders are and the community issues are, then that's something that you also need to own, because that was a choice. So even if you haven't done anything that you or anybody on your organization would say, oh, we haven't really caused harm, silence is a choice, and people remember the choice to be silent in times of difficulty, or to not be active partners from the time that you emerged or your organization was created. So let's talk about how you do that. Change through institutional memory. So there are a couple different types of institutional memory. There are event memories, so things that your organization has done in the past. Was the event, quote, successful? Why or why not? How are you defining success? How do you retell the story of the events that your organization has held in the past, or the partnerships that your organization has had in the past? Process memories are a different type of institutional memory. So how does your organization go about accomplishing tasks? This is really important when you think about things like, if we're going to do something in the community, what's our process for deciding what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, the ways in which we communicate that? Those process memories are really important, because that's what you have as your narrative about how the organization operates. You also want to be gathering information from community members about their understanding of process memories about your organization. Finally, decision memories. How do we determine the realm of possibilities within our organizations? How and why do we choose one action over another? These are some spaces where it might seem like we're making logical decisions based solely on, the facts and the data that we have, and not emotion or bias. But it's in these process and decision memories where some of our penchant towards bias or inequity can lie. And so when we're thinking about understanding our organizational history and the ways in which it has been perceived in various communities or constituencies that you might want to engage with and serve, it's really important to ask yourselves these questions within your organization. So, repairing relationships and building new ones. First thing you want to do is set some goals so that you know what it is that you're trying to do and how you plan to go about doing it. You can only set goals for what it is that you can control, right? So you cannot set goals for things that are outside of your locus of control. You cannot control how different constituencies and communities interpret your intentions or actions. You can only focus on your intentions and actions, right? So when people say we want to increase our board diversity, well, okay, that's a great overarching goal, but we need to be really specific about what it is that we're going to do on our end. Goals about things that we can control, about our messaging, our organizational culture, our onboarding process. That's an easier thing to manage. Create goals that align with your organizational culture and get buy-in. So you're not going to get buy-in from everyone, and we'll talk about some of those folks at the end of the presentation. But it is helpful to make sure that your goals align with what it is that your organization does well, so that you can have some successes under your belt for when this work actually gets really hard, as it will, because that's the nature of the work. Also, know why you're embarking on a particular path. So sometimes I work with organizations and they say, we want to diversify our board. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, we're all white, so we want to not be all white. Awesome sauce. So what does diversity mean in this context? Well, we're thinking race, ethnicity. Okay, great. So what other races or ethnicities would you like to have on the board? Others that aren't us, because we're all white. And you see how it becomes very difficult to establish a concrete goal that you can actually meet, And whenever you're reaching out to other individuals, like I've been approached to diversify many a board, and I'm like, oh, okay, great. So why now, or why me? And it's like, well, because we're all white. And I'm like, well, that's not a rationale. So what is it about the organization right now that that means that you want to quote unquote diversify, and what does that actually mean, so that we can get to some concrete goals? So some not so great examples. We want to diversify our partners. We want to increase engagement with diverse populations. We want to diversify our programming. Notice how diversify is showing up here a lot. This has become a catch-all word that people use to mean not exactly how things are now, but I don't really have a concrete understanding of what the promised land looks like in this context. So some things that are a little bit better to work towards: we want to build a relationship with the Latinx community next to our building. We might live in a predominantly Black and brown community. That's where our organization has always been housed. We don't have deep ties or partnerships, so we want to build relationships there, right? That's a little more concrete. That gives you at least a starting place for some action items and steps, and also helps you set up evaluation parameters so that you don't get lost in the work. And so that you know whenever you're hitting the mark and achieving a thing, and when you might need to stop and reevaluate and take stock and alter your plans. Something like, we want to assess the representation needs of the communities we serve. Do you even know the communities that you currently do serve, and the communities that you want to serve, and what community means in this context, especially post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID, as many organizations have expanded their reach with digital offerings. So thinking really hard about the fact that words mean things, and defining our terms. So the overarching goal here is to focus on your organization's mission, values, and goals. And if those need to be revised, go on ahead and jump into that process. Your needs as the organization, and then others' needs as well. So just to give you a couple of ideas of some concrete things, when you're thinking about engaging with a particular community, being mindful of what in-group behavior and language looks and sounds and feels like, and out-group behavior looks and sounds and feels like. So an example of that is, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I don't speak Pittsburghese because my mother would never allow such a thing. But my language patterns are different than those of the native Philadelphians that I live around now. One thing that I noticed whenever I first moved here and started doing work is that whenever you say where you're from, there's a very distinct language pattern. So growing up in Pittsburgh, you just say I grew up in Pittsburgh. It's a collection of suburbs. Nobody really cares anything more than just that. In Philadelphia, you say your neighborhood and your cross streets. So you would say, I'm from West Philadelphia, 54th and Locust. If you don't say both of those things, people automatically identify you as an outsider. Now, that might seem like a really small, like, oh, okay, that's cool, whatever. But if you're thinking about the fact that your organization or your building might live in West Philadelphia and you want to engage with West Philadelphians, understanding language patterns like that might help identify you as somebody who at least cares enough to have noticed such a thing is really important. And you're not using it to trick people. Like when people ask me where I'm from, I don't say that and then later go, haha, but I'm a Pittsburgher later. I'm not trying to, bait and switch anyone, but it's about the care of language and practice and engaging with people. Many organizations ask me, how do I get to even understand what the community needs are? I always encourage people to go to a education open forum. So when they're talking about public schools in the area, where your organization is housed. I encourage people to go there to hear what community needs and concerns are when it comes to education, especially since lots of organizations have educational departments or practices or, programming. I encourage people to go to a local town hall of some sort, especially if you happen to coincide with election time. Again, you can hear what the local issues are. You get to hear the people that are the community leaders are the ones that are getting up to the microphone, and you can hear what their concerns are compared to the concerns of those that have positional or organizational power. And then you can begin to develop a sort of psychographic map of what is important to the communities that you want to serve, and how might your organization be presented as a partner, as a solution, as a means of providing important collective action. So those are some of the, this is especially important if you don't live in the area where you work. So for those that live in the communities where your organization is housed, it might be a little bit easier because you're doing things like going to the local grocery store. You see what's on the community boards whenever you go to the public library, which is another awesome space to sort of build authentic partnerships. Look on those boards that are always littered, well, pre-COVID, that were always littered with different community outreach and engagement. You get to see what matters to that community in those community spaces. And that's a lot better, I find. It's a little more, the word gumshoe was coming up in my head because I've been rewatching Carmen, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, but there's a lot more sleuthing involved in this, but it is a more organic process. You can speak more intelligently about the issues that you've noticed that your organization can be an asset or a help with, than you figuring out that one person that might be different than the rest of your board or organization, that everybody in your community that wants to diversify something is calling right now. One, because you're not really considering intersectionality. That is one representative of a large community. But it also can be a little lazy, right? Like you're taking the shortcut instead of going out into the community, showing your face, right? Your face needs to be a part of this work. Your body needs to be a part of this work. So you have to actually be in the communities that you want to serve so that people can get over the initial shock of seeing you there if you haven't been there before, or get over the shock of seeing you in that space again if your organization has been there before and has maybe left. And when I say the shock of seeing you, I don't mean you as a specific individual, although that might be part of it. I mean you as an embodiment, as a representative of your organization. So one thing when it comes to rebuilding relationships is that you've got to keep that same energy that you had before. And what I mean by that is it's really important to practice restorative action. So if your organization was responsible for something that was inequitable or just didn't go over well in the community in the past, providing restorative action is a foundational step to rebuilding that relationship. So if you eat someone's food, if you're in a co-working space and you go into the fridge and you decide, I know that lunch is not mine, but I'm going to go ahead and eat it because I'm hungry. Saying sorry is like an apology by itself is not restorative action. That person is now still hungry and they might have had their favorite food from the truck that only comes by between noon and 2, and now that food is gone. So the restorative action would be to replace the food. Ideally the exact same food, but if not, an approximation in conversation with the individual whose lunch you ate. Right? If you omitted someone from an email thread in the past, an email to everyone acknowledging the addition of that individual, because you might miss everybody sort of understanding that this individual is important to be included in the email exchange. It's important for them to have this knowledge. You're signaling to everyone the significance of this individual being a part of the conversation. If you've lost your temper or said something inequitable in a meeting or a community forum, it's important to apologize either in that same setting, if you have the wherewithal to do it at that point in time, or at the very least to the same group of people. This is important because you are recognizing the community harm and not just the harm that may have been done to one individual. It's also important for others within the community to understand that you know that there are behaviors that are appropriate and equitable and behaviors that are inappropriate and inequitable. And by acknowledging that to the same people in the room, you are beginning to repair and rebuild relationships. If you only apologize to that one individual in private via email, nobody else in the room knows that you know better. And so they might be avoiding you as a result of simply having secondhand knowledge of something that you or your organization has done in the past. So I'm going to put you back in your breakout groups. And in this session, I want you to think about, do you know who you want to build or rebuild with? Do you have some concrete ideas about the constituents or the groups or the communities? Who is it that you want to be in partnership with? And if you're not sure at this particular point in time, how are you going to go about figuring out what it is that you want to do next with regard to building partnerships? So in the interest of not being a jerk and having you come back mid-sentence, hopefully, I'm going to give you a whopping 10 minutes in this breakout group. So before I say anything further, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that your session moderator is going to be the individual with the most plants. So if you are somebody with a green thumb, I'm thinking inside the house, because there's always that person that's like, do you mean my garden in the back? I do not. So we're thinking in the house plants. So that's going to be your moderator. Moderators, please make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak and that everybody is prepared to at least share something about their process whenever we come back together. Okay, so off you go. Send you there. Here.
I was late, so I might need a room.
Yep, I'm putting you in one.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry for being late.
Oh, no worries. It's not school.
Ditto. Thank you. Thank you for putting me in room 8. I'm sorry I was late too.
It's fine.
Sorry.
Okay.
Well, welcome back, friends. All right, so who would like to share either who they would like to build partnership or be in partnership with, or how they're going to figure that out within their organizations?
This is Kevin Harnish with Providence Players. We had a very interesting, diverse group. We had Susan, who's with the Wrestling Chorale group, whose comment was that she has a background picture of the group, and she would like to have the group picture look as least as diverse as it is now, and include it and increase it. She's reaching out to, and the group has been reaching out to other local organizations and diverse groups to partner with them. And the good news is the initial positive feedback with the groups, but also the problem is when they join, other groups join together, it takes a while to, in between different performances, to keep up that relationship. And so the initial activities are positive, but it's an ongoing journey. Lila with the wrestling community group, her success has been identifying the goals and upfront and ongoing honest assessment to be able to and willing to support those goals going forward. And another fascinating one was our other member focused on international global engagements. Cecilia is setting up an organization, global organization, so artists can submit their works and as she said, their creative souls to share with others and for on a quid pro quo for needing for having venues and to set up in different regions of the world and facilitate travel to those regions to basically to hold up to put on performances or shows in those areas. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share about their organization?
I'll jump in there. This is Linda Sullivan. I was in a small group with Evan Hoffman with Next Stop Theater and Ken Avis with Creative Cauldron and other organizations. And, you know, our discussion sort of centered around, you know, the efforts we may have made to reach out into different communities and get better, broader representation to our programs have fallen flat. So then what do? You know, are you afraid to keep doing what you've done because it hasn't worked or it may do damage? Or how do you figure out, you know, the next steps or how to, you know, reach out into those communities a little bit better? And then that led to a conversation of the boards and, you know, sort of board representation and the concern of, you know, sort of how do you, you know, it's not just ethnic diversity, but it's many diversities and bringing on people and getting started with that and where that will, you know, lead to. You know, it's difficult to, you know, if we were to reflect the county, it would be very difficult to bring on so many people, you know, that we had the right, balance of percentages. And so we also talk about not worrying about those balance of percentages, but, you know, got to start with some relationships. So that was sort of the gist of our conversation.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else like to share?
This is Smitty. Our group was interesting because our group was diverse. in the sense of the communities that we serve. So, you know, I'm with Linda, we've been working on looking at diversity issues in terms of leadership and the ArtsFairfax board, and trying to make sure that we are representative of, reflective of the community we serve, which is a very large community, with many layers of that, which includes geographic diversity, racial, cultural, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, age diversity. But some other, there was, Reba, I don't want to speak for, or Ruba, I don't want to speak for you. Maybe you want to jump in, but Ruba is with Literacy Council of Northern Virginia and talked about how what they are looking for in terms of diversity is more diversity that is more representative of their community, which is a very specific non-English speaking community. Joe Ormisher was talking about the community that she serves in Herndon, which is quite different from the generic Fairfax County community, and all of us trying to figure out what do we do to make sure that we are reflective of the communities we serve and responsive to them.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to jump in to make sure that we have ample time for our question and discussion bit. So I'm going to reshare. Okay. So part of this process, and some of you have already touched upon this, and it definitely came up in some of your breakout groups. It sounds like the giving and receiving feedback process is going to be integral to partnership building. So it's important to remember that feedback is both verbal and nonverbal reinforcement of behavior and outcomes. The reason it exists, or its main purpose, is to encourage desired behavior. Yay, I like what you're doing. This works for me. I'm going to show up to your stuff. I'm going to engage with you. And to discourage unwanted behavior. So I'm not going to show up. That's nonverbal. I don't like what you did. This didn't work for me, right? Most people consider feedback to be if you're talking about feedback in a partnership process, people tend to skew it negatively. They tend to assume that it's negative. But even if it's feedback that you missed the mark or didn't do exactly what worked for a constituency or for an individual, feedback is always a gift. Nobody has to tell you anything about what it is that you've done. So if somebody's taking the time to let you know that a thing did or did not work for them, consider that part of the relationship. Somebody's doing you a solid if they're giving you feedback of any sort, whether it's positive or negative. When it comes to equity work, it's important because people who want to advance equity want information about how to act and react in ways that encourage an equitable environment. Feedback is a requirement in order for that to occur. There are also people that are ambivalent or antagonistic to equity work who need information about what is acceptable and what isn't in an equitable working space or when you're engaging with communities. So I always say that I love hearts and minds when it comes to equity work, but over time I've gotten to the space where I'm just like, just treat people right and act right at work, and adhere to whatever the behavioral standards that have been established in order to create an equitable work environment are. So those individuals also need feedback about what's working and what isn't, what's acceptable and what's not. Potential partners, and this is the really important takeaway about feedback and equity work for this session specifically, partners and potential partners also need to understand how the organization operates. People are paying attention to whether or not people feel comfortable giving you feedback, whether or not you're receptive to that feedback, and what you do with that feedback. And that does directly impact whether or not people are taking your phone calls or responding to your emails, or whether or not that relationship does move forward over time. So the general feedback process: observed action, impact assessment, giving and taking with understanding each other's point of view it's really important to paraphrase for understanding, especially if you're dealing in a cross-cultural context where a word or a turn of phrase or an idiomatic phrase, idiomatic phrases are really difficult in the feedback process. They're really difficult in interpersonal communication, but things like kill two birds with one stone, or just a lot of the turns of phrase that we use in common North American vernacular can be really difficult for people for whom English is not their first language. So whenever you're engaging in the feedback process, especially for those of you who want to deal with communities for whom English is a second or third or fourth or fifth language, whenever you're in that feedback process, paraphrase for understanding to make sure that the message that they are trying to give you is the message that you are receiving. Finally, you want to commit to feedback. So keep in mind that we are all human, and our brains are designed to protect us. It's why I don't remember childbirth specifically. I just remember the cute thing that I got at the end of it. So our brains are designed to protect us from things that don't feel good. Sometimes feedback does not feel good, and you have to work through some of your natural built-up responses to be defensive or to let your ego come through whenever you're receiving feedback. You're going to have to break some of that down in order to really be a fully engaged partner. So, what does that look like in practice? If you are unsure of what to say when somebody is giving you feedback that doesn't really feel good, or about something that your organization has done before you even came to the organization, thank you or I hear you. And that's going to be the end of it, right? If you're unsure of what to say nothing. Take a moment, process. If you're unsure of what they mean, ask clarifying questions or ask for an example. If somebody says, I didn't feel welcome in your space, do you mean the ticket buying process? Do you mean the front lobby? Was it, trying to use the restroom? Was it the programming itself? Was it the people that you saw on stage? Because just not feeling welcome is not enough for you to go back and try to create some meaningful change. You might start mucking around with things that are perfectly fine because you didn't ask clarifying questions about what the individual meant about not feeling welcome in the space. If you think your actions have been misunderstood, most people start off with, well, I didn't mean, or that wasn't my intent. Well, okay. There's a difference between intent and impact. We're focusing on impact. So if somebody tells you that you've harmed them or your organization has created harm in some way, well, I didn't mean to do that, is a really quick way to shut down that conversation and make sure that they don't come back to you. What makes you say that, or other types of clarifying questions, that's a great way to start. Remember, your main purpose whenever you're receiving feedback, whenever you're trying to engage in a new partnership or rebuild an old partnership, is fact finding, not fault finding. The other thing is, don't debate the tone, language, or the finer points of the argument in the moment. People have a right to their emotional response and their psychological response to things, as long as they're not causing you psychological or physical harm in the moment. If somebody curses, you'll be okay. I'm sure you've watched movies and TV and HBO. If somebody's language doesn't strike you as particularly professional in the moment, so what? It's about the information that they're giving you. And that's another quick way to shut down tone policing, language policing, saying you didn't state your feedback in the form of a question unless you're on Jeopardy, is really a way to break down communication. So what do you do with feedback? Create a plan of action to incorporate the feedback. That might include additional fact finding, asking if there's a particular incident, getting additional information about the incident, the impact of that incident, figuring out what additional conversations, resources, and actions need to occur in order to incorporate that feedback. And here's the real big takeaway for building relationships. Let the giver know how you've used the feedback. Right? Thank you so much for your feedback. Just wanted to follow up. Right now, we're having additional conversations at our staff level. We're dedicating resource X, Y, and Z resources, be specific, to looking further into the feedback that you gave. And then once you decide on a plan of action and you implement it, hey, checking in again, just to let you know, thank you so much for that feedback. As a result of it, we're doing A, B, and C. That's how you get to the space where people are willing to give you more. So some behaviors to avoid: arguing. If you get to the point where you're going back and forth in the conversation, it's time to stop the conversation, take a pause, and come back to it when you've had a chance to calm down. Getting overly emotional. Now, there's a difference here between having an emotional response, which you are perfectly entitled to, and taking up all of the emotional air in the room. Those are two different things. I'm talking about the latter. Try not to take feedback personally. It might feel personal, but this is about you serving your organization, and you might have to make some personal changes or have some critical personal reflection in order to do that. But you know, it's important to separate yourself from your work. I know that's very difficult to do in a capitalist society in which we live, but you are not you're not your organization, in the sense of, if somebody's saying that overall the organization or the programming didn't work for them, or doesn't feel equitable, or doesn't feel inclusive or welcoming, even if you're in charge of programming, they aren't saying you individual are inequitable and unwelcoming. And sometimes we tend to conflate those two things, and it makes it difficult to actually hear the feedback. Do not hold a grudge. If somebody's told you a thing that was designed to be feedback to help your organization, and then later, if you're in a partnership, a funding, a hiring position with that individual, holding a grudge is not the way to go. Also illegal. There's that. And finally, when it comes to asking for feedback, a lot of organizations are guilty of seeking permission granters. So, you know, we're doing such and such for Black History Month, and I know in my heart of hearts that it's questionable, but I do know one Black person that would be okay with it. So I'm going to ask them for their feedback, because I already know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get a cosign, right? So avoid seeking the same type of feedback from the same one individual, because, you know, the different communities that you're trying to serve are not a monolith. Try to open your organization up to many different types of feedback from many different types of people. That means altering your organization's feedback mechanisms, most likely. And for those that are operating in multilingual contexts, making sure that those feedback mechanisms operate in languages other than English. So the most important thing is that being receptive to feedback encourages more frequent, honest, and useful feedback. If, now that I'm allowed to do so because I'm fully vaccinated, I go out to brunch and I use the bathroom and I come back and my skirt is in my tights, and somebody lets me know that, and I yell at them as a response to them giving me very important feedback about not having my bottom out, that person will then in the future not only let me walk around with my skirt and my tights, but also let me walk around with toilet paper on my shoe, right? Because I did not respond well when they tried to help. So being receptive just makes it so that you're opening up the channels of communication, and people are paying attention to that. So I want to make sure we get to the chance to chat. So I did cross out breakout session 3, but your intellectual homework, and this is part of the recording, is to figure out how your organization will seek and encourage feedback while you're engaging in equity work. Look at your feedback mechanisms that currently exist. Do an assessment on if people are using them, and if so, which people are using them. Is it only the people that you're already engaging with, or people that you would like to engage with? And how can you expand your feedback processes in order to make sure that new and potential partners are in a space where they can provide meaningful feedback? So the last bit here are the individuals that you might encounter as you do this work of building new partnerships. First followers are awesome. Those are the people that are like, I'm going to give this organization a chance, or I've seen some of what you do and I believe in what it is that you're doing, and I'm willing to be a partner. You just want to make sure that those lines of communication are open. You know, here's a hint. It's a lot of work to build a new partnership, but it's worthwhile work, because keep in mind that you're not just building the partnership that's right in front of you. People are paying attention to what you do. So it's about building the relationship with the organization or the constituency or the community that's right in front of you, also for the benefit of those who are thinking about potentially engaging with you in the future. First followers also come with detractors. So you're going to have some people, whether or not they don't like equity work and don't believe all people are equal or whatever, you're going to have some people that do not come with you on the journey to becoming a more equitable organization. You actually cannot serve everyone, because if you try to serve everyone, then you're serving problematic people who are going to act as barriers simply by their existence to people that, you know, may want to engage with the organization. So as you encounter these individuals, just keep in mind that not everybody is supposed to come with you on this equitable journey, and you do need to maybe shed some weight. Finally, you're going to have some first failures. And this is the part that a lot of people don't talk about often, but you're going to have some stalled starts. You're going to have some things that you put a lot of time and energy and resources into that don't actually have the impact that you wanted, or you don't see the increase or the increase in audience members or engagement or partnerships that you wanted. It's really important to use each of those opportunities as a learning experience. I think that one of the main issues is that whenever people are successful, they talk a lot about how they got to success with equity work, but they don't talk about the stalled starts. And so, imagine if you happened upon puberty and nobody had told you anything about it before it happened. You're just like, this is weird and I didn't expect this to happen, and oh my goodness, right? So talk to each other about your first failures. Talk to each other about the programs that you wanted to work in a particular way that did not manifest in the outcomes that you desired, so that you all can collectively learn, it might have just been that it was on Tuesdays and your community does blah, blah, blah on Tuesdays and you didn't know that. Or it might just be that there was a turn of phrase in the marketing that indicated that it wasn't for the community that you were actually hoping to reach. Sometimes there are simple solutions to some of the lack of the outcomes that you wanted. Sometimes they're more complex and you don't know the full history of your organization's relationship to a particular constituency. But the more that you're putting it out there that you're trying to learn, the more people will give you information. So it's really important to think about the fact that these first failures will happen because they are a necessary part of the process. Okay, so sorry I went a little bit over, but we do have some time for questions and comments. And you can raise your hand or type them into the chat.
Yes, thank you, Brea. So feel free, you can unmute yourself or place questions in the chat. I'll give everybody a minute or two if they want to form some questions or ask.
Right, so I was throwing intellectual spaghetti at a wall, so I'll give you a chance to see what sticks, and then form some questions or comments, and then jump in.
Raise your hand. Oops.
Oh, Joe?
Okay, I'll jump in then. Brea, thank you very much for this. This was hugely informative. Sort of as Smitty said, I work in Herndon. We've got an enormously diverse population here. In fact, our Hispanic population is greater than anybody else. We're 36.9% Hispanic, 18.5% Asian, 33% white, and then 7.2% Asian, Black, African American, and then I'm the 0.4 that's somebody different. And you do make a good point about people don't always understand what you say. I mean, to be honest, it's not necessarily about the color of people's skin either. It's sometimes, and a lot of people who know me here, and I've reconnected too with a lot of people I've been missing desperately, but I don't always understand what an American says sometimes, because we talk So don't think just because your skin is the same color that you necessarily understand. I mean, sometimes I have to think hard, as you all do with me. You know, I know friends will say, "What did you say?" And vice versa. I think we've got to be kind to each other. I read something recently. We've got to learn to be kind before we learn anything else, and just sort of step into somebody else's shoes. Brie, I think you did a really fine job in sort of making that understanding for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was great. And Danielle, thank you for hosting us all. Appreciate that. And I'm sorry I was late.
No worries. I had an interesting, like, all people of the same skin tone on a monolith moment. A couple of days ago, I was parking my car somewhere, and the valet, I think he ended up saying that he was Ethiopian, so he was West African, and he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, you're from Jamaica because I have locks," and I was just like, "Nope." From Philly. And it was just funny that, like, and I went and I told my husband about it, and he was like, "Man, you know, there's your poster for Black people aren't a monolith, huh?" And I was like, "I know." It was so funny. We were like that Spider-Man meme where we were pointing at each other.
Yeah. I talked to somebody the other day who was the same skin tone as I am, and they're from Albania. Totally, completely different. And I've actually it's one place I've never been to is Albania. I had no inkling of his culture or anything like that. So I think we've got to think outside, not what we're talking about when we talk about diversity. You know, it's interesting. I mean, the other thing is the immigration issue as well, Brie. You know, when we talk about, you know, the diversity of everybody, we've also got to remember, and I know, and I don't know if she's still on at the moment, but Smitty certainly knows that because of her husband. But the immigration issue is very real as well, and sometimes you've got to reach out very carefully to people because of their immigration status and so on. So that's another part of the puzzle.
Yeah, so if you have a large immigrant population and status is one of the things that is of concern, there's very specific safe language to be mindful of, and the only way that you're going to know what it is for that community is to talk to that community and sort of be, you know, there is some cultural vetting that is a part of this. You know, it's, are you safe? Is your organization safe? And safety means a lot of different things to different people. And so one of the most important parts of this job about building partnerships is to figure out what safety means to the communities that you want to engage with, and get about making your organization a safe space for them to be and engage in. So thank you for mentioning that. That's another important part.
Yeah.
There were a couple things in the chat. So we're a question from somebody who's operating outside of an organization as an individual, not on staff, figuring out how to initiate discussions and get them interested and invested in this work, and also providing ongoing support. So I would just say direct and honest feedback about the things that you've seen or the things that you would like to see from the organization is a great place to start. So, you know, identifying who you are with relationship to the organization, that you're somebody that's invested and interested and you would like to see them do A, B, and C. Presenting yourself as somebody who's interested in providing ongoing support is also a really, you know, nice bonus. I would say, as an individual who's not actually a board member, or if you want to be an established volunteer, just be mindful of, you know, your time and energy and self-care and all of that other good stuff whenever you're making that as an offer. But I think direct and honest feedback is the best way to sort of get in and start helping the organization recognize that their constituents or people that they serve or people that are engaged with them are interested in the organization doing more or better or different. So they won't know unless you explicitly tell them. The other half of that being, you know, if they don't respond in the ways that you would like, or there are some there's like ongoing hesitancy about not getting started, about not saying or doing the wrong thing, which, you know, can be paralyzing for organizations. Like they want to do equity work, but they're so afraid of doing the wrong thing that they don't do anything, which oddly enough is the wrong thing. So not doing anything is the wrong thing here. Everybody has to get started somewhere. And it's about just trying to be mindful of and mitigate any potential harm. So sometimes organizations do like to have a nudge or a push from somebody, whether it's internal or external, to say, I am paying attention. I would like for you to do something. So I hope that's helpful. Another thing that popped up in the chat, so the Rest and Chorale always holds a lesson learned session after each concert, but we typically only get feedback from our own membership. Listening to this session, I'm aware that we need to make a point to include the partner organization in these sessions or hold separate surveys or sessions with their leadership. Yes, so sometimes separate surveys can be great for different constituencies. You might want different information from different constituencies, so there's that aspect of it. The other side of it is you might be asking the exact same questions with different language. So that it resonates more with those who are engaging with the survey from respective organizations. Meeting patterns, communication norms might also be different whenever you're dealing with a partner organization. I like to ask when I'm partnering with them up front, how do you like to engage? And I try to be sensitive to, you know, differences that I notice. It works in any sort of collaboration, right? So I co-author things with people sometimes, and the way that I write as a researcher is I want proof of concept. I get a really crappy first draft together, and it's just, am I applying the theory in the right way? Do my conclusions make sense? Is it logical? I'm thinking proof of concept. And I have a really awesome colleague that I love to death. Antonio is an editor by nature. And when we first co-authored something and I sent him my proof of concept draft, he was just like, I'm sorry, ma'am, are you illiterate? And I was just like, oh, I wasn't editing my work. Okay, so you like to work with polished drafts. And I know that now, and that's not difficult for me to do. So every time we collaborate, I know that I have to hit F7 and spell check before I send something to you. Awesome, lesson learned. So it's about being sensitive to and mindful of the ways that your partners like to work and engage. And if it's different from how you work or like to engage, and it's something that you can easily hit F7, then go ahead and do it. If it's something that is really against your organizational values or norms, then that's also not the partnership for you. So just be mindful of that. Another comment, diversity takes many forms. We tend to focus on some of the same ones that are prominent at whatever moment, but something that is often overlooked is diversity of thought and viewpoint, which can cut across all others. Yes, that is true. It tends to, I would say one of the reasons why people have started to or have shied away from diversity of thought is it used to be used as a diversity resistance tactic whenever diversity, equity, and inclusion first emerged in the field. People would say, oh, of course we're diverse. We have diversity of thought. We have two left-leaning Democrats and a centrist and a Republican, and everybody looked and sounded and came from the same, you know, essential socioeconomic background. So organizations, and that happened a lot in the late 90s, early aughts. And so there was sort of like a step back in the field of at least researchers from focusing on diversity of thought, because people tended to use it as like a backdoor to not actually do the work. I do think that there is some space to re-enter into conversations about how diversity of thought needs to be an element, but I did just want to offer that at least historical context on how it got to that space. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question. This is Joanne Azzarello, and I'm sorry I don't see where I'm to raise my hand. I know this is a very simple question, and I'm sort of embarrassed to ask it, but we have a new board member. We have two new board members coming on. One is an African American, and one is Asian, and how they haven't come to meetings yet. So how do you engage them in what you want to get from them without offending them and saying, well, we asked you to be on the board because of who you are?
Is
How
that
do
why they
you-
were asked to be on the board?
Pardon?
Is that why they were asked to be on the board?
Yes, because our board is not diverse.
So one thing to be mindful of as people begin to diversify their boards is to be careful about tokenism. So
Right.
it's an idea of, yeah, that can be one of the reasons that they were asked to join the board, but what's the whole picture of who this person is and why they're on the board? They're not just you know, a walking identity marker. I'm sure you had other rationales for their area of expertise or their standing in the community, their interest and engagement with the organization. So whenever you're having that conversation with them, that onboarding conversation, board onboarding is so important. So I'm glad that you're asking. The conversation can be, yes, you might be the first or only, you know, person that identifies at least racially or ethnically in the way that you do on the board. We're also interested in these other facets of who you are, and how is the board willing or able to support them as they do this work? Because, you know, you're at, not just you in particular, but any board that's diversifying is asking a lot of a first and only. It is a big lift. And so how is the rest of the board or the ED prepared to support in those moments? I always encourage active bystander training for boards that are working to diversify, so that in those moments, as boards work towards becoming more equitable and inclusive and diverse, there are going to be just moments of people not being used to operating in spaces that are more diverse. And so it can't always be upon your first Black board member, your first Asian board member to say, hey, that was inequitable, or that didn't sound right. It's got to be on, you know, the rest of the board to also be engaging in active bystander practices, to also call that out, to also start to change the culture of the board. So, to a long-winded way of answering your question, have a full conversation about the entirety of the reason that they were asked to join the board, and also begin to gather information about why they said yes and what they hope to get out of their board engagement, so that it can definitely be a given, a purposeful give and take. Make a checklist of, you know, the things that they want to get or the things that they want to do. I would also have a buddy system of 2 different board members, for them to sort of engage with and begin to build a personal relationship, so that they can go and ask, you know, those questions that you don't know the answer to whenever you first join a board. So do we all just agree to consent agenda? Do you guys actually read it here? Like, all of those questions. Have 2, because sometimes you pick one person and you know, the personalities don't gel, and so having an heir and a spare here is really important.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. And I think we're going to start to wrap up. A lot of really great questions and engagement. So just to kind of start to wrap things up, go ahead and, if you would, type in one word describing the session. And I'm going to share my screen just to show a few other things. So we are coming to a close on this workshop series. Our final workshop will be on June 10th, same time, starting at 12 p.m. Through 1:30, with that last, you know, about 30 minutes for discussion and networking. And a couple of key dates to kind of mark your calendars. Our operating support grant panel will be from May 25th through the 27th, with the announcement happening in August. And the Arts Ignite Recovery Grant information session will be on June 8th, with the application deadline on July 21st. I want to thank Brea, and I want to thank everyone for participating. I want to give just a few special kind of shout outs. A couple of our board members who participated. Smitty and Lila, thank you so much for joining us today. And also a couple of our advisory group members, Niati and Edgar. We really appreciate all of you for joining us. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Arts Forward Fund, National Endowment for the Arts, Reston Community Center, and the Virginia Commission for the Arts. Thank you. Let's stop sharing. I'm also going to include in the chat a link to a survey, which I'll also be emailing out afterwards. We'd really appreciate if you could take a few minutes to complete that. And we really appreciate the honest and candid conversations and look forward to seeing everyone in our final workshop. Thank you.
Thanks for your
everybody.
engagement today, everyone. Really appreciate it.